At 11:47 p.m., one text message destroyed everything. Ethan Cole stared at his phone screen, frozen. The sender's name alone made his blood run cold. Victoria Hale, CEO of the company he'd served for 2 years. The message read, "See what you could have had." Below it, an image that crossed every professional line imaginable. He had 3 choices: accept her advance, ignore it, and hope for the best, or respond with the truth. Ethan chose integrity. By morning, his career was over. But that single reply would expose a web of corruption, destroy an empire, and prove that sometimes refusing to compromise is the most powerful decision a person can make. If you want to see how one father's courage brought down a corporate tyrant, stay until the end. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the building settling into the night. Ethan Cole sat on the edge of his worn couch, his laptop balanced on his knees, eyes burning from the glare of spreadsheets that all seemed to blur together after midnight. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours ago, but he'd kept sipping it anyway, more habit than need. In the next room, his 8-year-old daughter, Maya, slept soundly. Her small chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Ethan had checked on her twice already tonight, watching her sleep with that mixture of exhaustion and fierce protectiveness that only single parents truly understand. Every extra hour he worked meant something. It meant the rent check wouldn't bounce. It meant Maya's school supplies were covered. It meant maybe, just maybe, he could afford to take her to that science museum she'd been begging to visit for months. 2 years. That's how long Ethan had been grinding at Apex Innovations, a tech company that had exploded from startup to industry player in less than 5 years. The growth had been meteoric, the culture intense, and the leadership complicated. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hale, CEO, founder, visionary, tyrant. The words people used to describe her depended entirely on where you stood in the corporate hierarchy. To investors, she was a genius. To the board, she was untouchable. To the rank-and-file employees who actually built the products, she was a shadow, powerful, distant, and absolutely terrifying. Ethan had met her exactly 3 times in 2 years. The first time was during his interview, where she'd appeared for exactly 90 seconds, sized him up with eyes that seemed to calculate his worth down to the decimal point, and left without saying a word. He got the job offer 2 hours later. The second time was at the company holiday party, where she'd given a speech about excellence without compromise, while the open bar ensured nobody remembered the details. The third time was 6 months ago, when she'd walked past his desk, paused, looked directly at him, and said, "You work hard. That's good. Don't stop." Then she was gone. Those 7 words had felt like a benediction and a warning all at once. In the cutthroat world of Apex Innovations, Victoria Hale's attention was currency. People built entire careers hoping for a single moment of recognition from her. Others lived in terror of being noticed for the wrong reasons. Ethan had tried to stay in the middle, work hard, keep his head down, provide for Maya, and avoid the office politics that seemed to swallow people whole. But tonight, at 11:47 p.m., that careful balance shattered. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. Ethan glanced at it without much interest. Probably a spam text or a notification from some app he'd forgotten to mute. He reached for it absently, planning to silence it and get back to the expense reports that were due by morning. Then he saw the sender's name, Victoria Hale. Ethan's hand froze halfway to the phone. His brain stuttered, trying to process what he was seeing. Victoria Hale didn't text employees. She barely acknowledged their existence. The company had 700 people on payroll, and she communicated exclusively through executive assistants, carefully worded emails, and the occasional company-wide memo that read like it had been drafted by lawyers. Direct communication? Personal texts? Never. Ethan picked up the phone slowly as if it might explode. The preview on his lock screen showed only the first line. "See what you could have had." His pulse quickened. He unlocked the phone with fingers that suddenly didn't feel quite steady. The full message appeared, and below those 5 words was a photograph. Ethan's stomach dropped. It was Victoria Hale. There was no question about that. But this wasn't the severe, suit-clad executive who commanded boardrooms and investor meetings. This was something else entirely. An image so intimate, so deliberately provocative, that for several long seconds, Ethan's brain simply refused to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a hack, a phishing scam. Someone had compromised her phone and was sending this to who? Random employees? Why would they target him? But the number was right. He'd seen it before on company directories marked as VHCEO, personal. This was her actual phone, which meant Ethan set the phone down on the coffee table like it was radioactive. He stood up, paced to the window, came back, sat down again. His mind was racing through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Option 1. This was a genuine mistake. Victoria had meant to send this to someone else, her husband, presumably, and had somehow hit Ethan's contact by accident. But that didn't make sense. Her message history with him was completely empty. This was the first text she'd ever sent him. How do you accidentally message someone you've never texted before? Option 2. Her phone had been hacked and someone was trying to embarrass her or destroy her reputation. Possible. But why target him specifically? Ethan was nobody. A mid-level operations manager who processed vendor contracts and optimized supply chains. If you wanted to damage Victoria Hale, there were 100 more strategic targets in the company. Option 3. Ethan didn't want to consider option 3, but it sat in his mind like a stone, heavy and immovable. Option 3 was that this was intentional, that Victoria Hale had deliberately sent this image to him late at night with a message that sounded less like a mistake and more like an invitation. No, that was insane, wasn't it? Ethan pulled up his laptop and opened the company's internal messaging system. He navigated to the anonymous rumor board, a back-channel Slack workspace that employees had created precisely because official channels were monitored and sanitized. He typed in Victoria's name. The results made his blood run cold. Threads going back 18 months. Whispers, allegations, stories that always followed the same pattern. Did you hear about Marcus, VP promotion out of nowhere? He'd only been here 8 months. Sarah from finance just quit. No notice, just gone. Someone said she looked like she'd been crying. Anyone else think it's weird how many people leave right after getting close to the executive floor? And then, buried in a thread from 7 months ago, a comment that made Ethan's hands shake. My friend worked here last year. She said VH sent her something late at night. Something inappropriate. When she didn't respond the right way, she was gone within a week, escorted out by security. NDA signed before she could even clean out her desk. The reply below it, bullshit, you're making that up. But 3 other comments chimed in with similar stories. Different details, same pattern. Ethan closed the laptop. His phone sat on the table, screen dark now, but the message still glowing in his mind. He thought about Maya sleeping in the next room. He thought about the rent check due in 12 days. He thought about the job market, brutal and unforgiving, especially for someone with a termination on their record. He thought about the silence that seemed to follow Victoria Hale wherever she went, the way people looked away when she passed, the way conversations stopped, the way certain topics were never, ever discussed in official meetings. And he thought about the 23 other people who had messaged in that anonymous thread, each one saying some version of the same thing. If you want to survive here, you don't say no to Victoria Hale. Ethan picked up his phone. He could delete the message, pretend he never saw it, show up to work tomorrow, and act like nothing had happened. That was the smart play, the safe play. But as he stared at that photograph, at the calculated intimacy of it, at the message that felt less like seduction and more like a test, something else crystallized in his mind. This wasn't the first time Victoria had done this, and it wouldn't be the last, unless someone drew a line. Ethan's fingers moved across the screen before his rational mind could stop them. He typed 4 sentences. Short, clear, unambiguous. I didn't miss out. I chose integrity. This is inappropriate, and I'm not interested. Please don't contact me like this again. He stared at the message for a full minute. Then he hit send. The whoosh sound felt louder than it should have. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then below his message, 3 dots appeared. Victoria Hale is typing. The dots pulsed, once, twice, 3 times. Then they disappeared. No response came. Ethan waited, heart hammering, but his phone stayed silent. He set it down and tried to return to his work, but the spreadsheets might as well have been written in ancient Greek. His concentration was obliterated. At 12:43 a.m., he gave up and went to bed. Sleep didn't come easy. When it finally did, his dreams were filled with boardrooms and locked doors and the sensation of falling through empty space while voices whispered just beyond hearing. Morning arrived with Maya's voice calling from her bedroom. "Dad! Dad! I can't find my science folder." Ethan dragged himself out of bed, head foggy, and helped her locate the folder wedged between her bookshelf and the wall. He made her breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, the same thing every Tuesday, and packed her lunch while she chattered about the field trip her class was taking next month. Normal. Everything had to seem normal. He dropped her at school at 7:45, watched her run through the gates with her backpack bouncing, and then sat in his car for 5 minutes, staring at his phone. No new messages. Part of him had expected, what? An apology? An explanation? A threat? But there was nothing. Maybe she'd realized her mistake. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe the whole thing would just disappear. Ethan drove to work, parked in his usual spot, and walked through the glass doors of Apex Innovations at 8:27 a.m. The lobby was the same as always, sleek, modern, filled with motivational posters about innovation and disruption. The security guard, Marcus, nodded at him as he scanned his badge. Everything seemed normal. Ethan took the elevator to the 4th floor, walked to his desk, set down his bag, and logged into his computer. His email inbox loaded. At the top, marked urgent, was a message from Human Resources. Subject: Meeting required. Today, 9 a.m. Ethan, please report to conference room 7B at 9 a.m. sharp. This is mandatory. HR department. Ethan's stomach twisted. He checked the sender. It was from the main HR account, not an individual person. The message was sterile, bureaucratic, revealing nothing. But the timing. He looked at his phone again. The message thread with Victoria Hale stared back at him, his response sitting there like evidence. No. This couldn't be connected. HR meetings happened all the time. Performance reviews, policy updates, benefits enrollment. This was probably nothing, right? At 8:58, Ethan stood outside conference room 7B. The door was closed, the frosted glass revealing only vague shapes inside. He knocked. "Come in." The voice was clipped, professional, and unmistakably hers. Ethan opened the door. Victoria Hale sat at the head of the conference table, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. Her expression was completely neutral. Not angry, not embarrassed, not anything at all. Just flat. Beside her sat Jennifer Marks, the head of Human Resources. Jennifer looked uncomfortable, her hands folded on a thin manila folder in front of her. "Sit down, Ethan," Victoria said. It wasn't a request. Ethan sat. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jennifer glanced at Victoria, then at the folder, then at Ethan. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Victoria didn't move. She simply watched Ethan with those calculating eyes. The same eyes that had sized him up during his interview, the same eyes that had paused at his desk 6 months ago. Finally, she spoke. "Your employment with Apex Innovations is terminated, effective immediately." The words landed like a physical blow. Ethan's ears rang. He heard himself say, "What?" Jennifer cleared her throat. "Ethan, the company has decided to move in a different direction with your role. We're restructuring the operations department, and unfortunately, your position is being eliminated." "Restructuring," Ethan repeated. His voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "My position is eliminated." "That's correct." "When was this decision made?" Jennifer's eyes flicked to Victoria. "The final decision was made this morning." "This morning," Ethan said slowly. "At what time?" "I don't see how that's relevant." "What time?" Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Are you questioning the company's right to manage its workforce, Mr. Cole?" Ethan looked directly at her. "I'm questioning the timing." The air in the room seemed to compress. Jennifer jumped in quickly. "Ethan, I understand this is difficult. We're prepared to offer a severance package, 2 weeks' pay and continuation of health benefits for 30 days. In exchange, we'll need you to sign a standard separation agreement. She slid the folder across the table. Ethan didn't touch it. A standard separation agreement. Yes, it includes a non-disclosure clause, a non-disparagement clause, and a release of claims against the company. You want me to sign away my right to talk about why I was fired? You weren't fired, Jennifer said, a little too quickly. Your position was eliminated. There's a difference. Is there? Victoria leaned forward slightly. When she spoke, her voice was ice. Mr. Cole, you have two choices. You can sign the agreement, take the severance, and leave quietly, or you can refuse, in which case you'll receive nothing and your termination will be recorded as a firing for cause. For cause? Ethan's voice rose. What cause? Insubordination. Failure to maintain professional boundaries. Conduct unbecoming of an Apex employee. The accusations hung in the air like poison gas. Ethan understood instantly. If he fought this, she would flip the narrative. The text message would somehow become his fault. Him harassing her, him crossing lines, him being the problem. Who would believe a mid-level operations manager over the CEO? Jennifer pushed the folder closer. The severance is a generous offer, Ethan. I'd advise you to consider it carefully. Ethan looked down at the folder. 2 weeks' pay. 30 days of health insurance. In exchange for his silence and his dignity. He thought about Maya. He thought about rent. He thought about the job applications he'd have to fill out, the interviews where they'd ask why he left his last position, the reference checks that would dead end at this moment. Then he thought about the message on his phone, the image he never asked to see, the proposition he never invited. He thought about the other people, the ones in the anonymous threads, the ones who'd left suddenly, the ones who'd been erased from the company like they'd never existed. And he thought about the man he wanted his daughter to believe he was. Ethan stood up. He didn't touch the folder. I need to get my things from my desk, he said quietly. Jennifer looked relieved. Of course, security will escort you. I don't need an escort. I've worked here for 2 years without stealing anything. I'm not starting now. Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Protocol requires... I don't care what protocol requires. Ethan's voice was steady now, surprisingly calm. You've made your decision. I'll be gone in 15 minutes. He turned toward the door. Mr. Cole. He stopped, but didn't turn around. Victoria's voice was soft, almost gentle. It was somehow more menacing than if she'd shouted. Choices have consequences. I hope you remember that. Ethan left the conference room without responding. But his desk looked exactly as he'd left it 20 minutes ago. Coffee mug. Photo of Maya from her 7th birthday. A small, succulent plant that somehow survived his irregular watering schedule. 2 years of his life, condensed into a few personal items that fit in a cardboard box. Coworkers walked past without making eye contact. Some didn't know what had happened yet. Others had clearly already heard. News traveled fast in an office this size, and were doing the careful dance of pretending not to notice while desperately wanting to know more. Ethan packed methodically. Photos, coffee mug, a spare phone charger. The birthday card Maya had made him last year, decorated with crayon drawings of robots. As he picked up the succulent, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then something made him look. You got the message too, didn't you? Ethan stared at the text. His fingers moved almost automatically. Who is this? 3 dots appeared immediately. Someone who made the same mistake you did. Someone who thought having principles mattered more than keeping quiet. Ethan's pulse quickened. How did you get my number? I have my ways. Look, I know you probably just got fired, or you're about to be. I know you're scared and confused, and you're wondering if you did the right thing. You didn't answer my question. My name is David Brennan. I worked in marketing until 4 months ago. I got the same text you did, the same photo, and when I said no, well, you can guess what happened next. Ethan looked around the office. People were still carefully not watching him. Why are you contacting me now? Because you're not alone. And because if we don't do something, this is going to keep happening. Do something? Like what? Meet me, tonight. There's a coffee shop on 7th and Madison. 7 p.m. Come alone. I don't even know you. You know enough. You know she sent you that message. You know she destroyed your career when you refused. And you know deep down that this has happened before and it'll happen again unless someone stops it. Ethan's hands were shaking. I have a daughter. I can't afford to get involved in what? The truth? Look, you don't have to commit to anything. Just hear me out. 7 p.m. 7th and Madison. If you don't show, I'll understand. But if you do, bring your phone. Bring that message, because I think we might have a case. The three dots appeared again, then disappeared. One final message came through. You did the right thing last night. Don't let her make you regret it. Ethan slipped his phone into his pocket. He picked up his box of belongings, took one last look at the desk that had been his professional home for 2 years, and walked toward the elevator. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of the fourth-floor common area. People were gathered in small clusters, whispering. A few looked toward him, then quickly away. By tomorrow, he'd be a ghost story, a cautionary tale, the guy who pissed off Victoria Hale and paid the price. But as the elevator descended and the numbers ticked down toward the ground floor, Ethan found himself thinking about that text from David Brennan. You're not alone. The elevator doors opened. Ethan walked through the lobby for the last time, past Marcus, the security guard, through the glass doors, into the bright morning sunlight. His car was still in the parking lot. His daughter was still at school. His life was still moving forward, even if the path had just been violently redirected. He sat in the driver's seat, box of belongings in the passenger seat, and pulled out his phone. The message thread with Victoria Hale stared back at him. Then he scrolled to the unknown number. David Brennan, 7 p.m., 7th and Madison. Ethan closed his eyes. He could go home, lick his wounds, start sending out resumes, and try to rebuild his life quietly. That was the smart play, the safe play. Or he could show up at that coffee shop and find out what David Brennan knew, find out how many others there were, find out if maybe, just maybe, there was a way to make sure Victoria Hale never sent another message like that again. Ethan typed a response. I'll be there. He hit send before he could change his mind. Then he started his car and drove away from Apex Innovations, uncertain if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life or the first step towards something much bigger than his own survival. Behind him, in a corner office on the 15th floor, Victoria Hale stood at her window, watching the parking lot below. She saw Ethan's car pull out onto the street and disappear into traffic. Her phone sat on her desk, the message thread still open. She'd read his response a dozen times already. I chose integrity. Most people, when confronted with power, folded. They compromised. They rationalized. They took the path of least resistance because that's what humans did when survival was on the line. But every once in a while, someone chose differently. Victoria picked up her phone and made a call. Jennifer, I need you to do something for me. Ethan Cole's severance package. I want it reduced. No health insurance extension. 1 week's pay, not 2. And make sure his termination is coded as fired for cause in the system. Jennifer's voice wavered slightly. Ma'am, we already offered him the 2-week package. If we change it now, he didn't sign it, which means we're not obligated to honor it. Make the change. Yes, ma'am. Victoria ended the call. She looked out the window again at the city sprawling below her, at the empire she'd built from nothing. People like Ethan Cole thought integrity was a shield. They were about to learn it was just another word for vulnerability. And in Victoria Hale's world, vulnerability was fatal. The coffee shop on 7th and Madison was the kind of place designed to be forgettable. Neutral walls, generic artwork, the persistent smell of burnt espresso and synthetic vanilla. Ethan arrived at 6:53 p.m., 7 minutes early, and ordered a black coffee he had no intention of drinking. He chose a table in the back corner, away from the windows, and waited. The afternoon had been a blur. He'd picked Maya up from school, listened to her excited chatter about the frog dissection her class was going to do next week, and tried to act like his entire world hadn't just collapsed. He'd made her dinner, mac and cheese from a box, her favorite, and then called his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, to ask if Maya could stay with her for a few hours. Date night? Mrs. Chen had asked with a hopeful smile. Something like that, Ethan had lied. Now he sat alone in a coffee shop, nursing cold coffee and checking his phone every 30 seconds, wondering if he was about to walk into some kind of trap. At 6:59, the door opened. A man in his mid-30s entered, scanning the room with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to trust his surroundings. He was tall, lean, with dark hair going prematurely gray at the temples, and the kind of exhaustion around his eyes that suggested too many sleepless nights. Their eyes met. The man walked directly to Ethan's table and sat down without asking. "David Brennan," he said, extending his hand. Ethan shook it. "Ethan Cole, though you already knew that." "I did." David pulled out his phone and set it on the table between them, screen down. "Thank you for coming. I know this is unusual." "That's one word for it." David allowed himself a brief, humorless smile. "How long has it been since you got fired?" 8 hours. "Then you're still in shock. That's normal. Give it another day or two and the anger will hit. Then the fear. Then the desperate scramble to figure out what the hell you're going to do next." Ethan studied him. "You sound like you've been through this before." 4 months ago, almost to the day. David leaned back in his chair. "I worked in marketing, senior campaign manager. I'd been with Apex for 3 years. Good performance reviews, solid relationships with my team, no disciplinary issues. Then one night, my phone buzzed at 11:34 p.m. Victoria Hale." "Victoria Hale?" David's jaw tightened. "Same message you got. See what you could have had. Same photo. I stared at that thing for 20 minutes trying to convince myself it was a mistake." "What did you do?" "Nothing. At first, I didn't respond at all. Just turned off my phone and tried to sleep." David's fingers drummed against the table. "The next morning, I showed up to work and everything seemed normal. I thought maybe I'd dodged it. Maybe she'd been drunk, or her phone had been hacked, or I don't know. I was grasping at explanations." "When did you realize it wasn't a mistake?" 3 days later. I got called into a meeting with HR and 2 people from legal I'd never seen before. They told me there had been complaints about my conduct. Unspecified complaints. Unverified complaints. But serious enough that they were terminating me immediately. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "They didn't give you specifics?" "They couldn't, because there weren't any real complaints. It was all fabricated." David's voice was bitter. "They offered me a severance package with an NDA attached. Sign it and get 2 weeks' pay, or refuse and leave with nothing. I was stupid enough to think I could fight it, so I refused." "What happened?" "They coded my termination as gross misconduct in the system, which meant when potential employers did reference checks, all they heard was that I'd been fired for serious violations. No details, just the implication that I'd done something bad enough to warrant immediate termination." David's eyes were hard. "I've applied to 43 jobs in 4 months. I've had 2 interviews. Both ended the moment they called Apex for a reference." The coffee shop suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. "Why are you telling me this?" Ethan asked quietly. "Because you need to know what you're up against, and because you're not the only one." David picked up his phone and unlocked it. "After I got fired, I started digging. I wanted to understand what had happened, why it had happened. I reached out to former employees through LinkedIn, through mutual connections, through every back channel I could find." He pulled up a document and turned the phone toward Ethan. It was a spreadsheet. Names, dates, departments, and a column labeled Status. Ethan's eyes tracked down the list. Marcus Rivera, Sales, terminated Jennifer Kwan. Engineering, resigned. David Brennan, Marketing, terminated Sarah Mitchell. Finance, terminated James Okonkwo. Operations, resigned. The list went on. 12 names, 13, 15. 17 people, David said. 17 people I've identified who received some version of that message from Victoria Hale. Some got the exact same photo you did. Others got different images, different texts, but always the same pattern. Late at night, personal, inappropriate. And all of them either quit or got fired within 2 weeks of receiving it. The ones who responded positively? David's expression darkened. They tended to get promotions, fast-tracked careers, access to opportunities that made no sense based on their qualifications. Ethan thought about the rumors he'd seen on the anonymous message boards, the whispers about overnight promotions and inexplicable favoritism. He couldn't find words adequate to the scope of what David was describing. Systematic, David finished. This isn't a CEO making a drunken mistake. This is a pattern of behavior going back at least 2 years, probably longer. She identifies people she wants, sends them a message, and then rewards compliance while destroying anyone who refuses. How is this even possible? How does no one know about this? People know, they just don't talk about it. David pulled his phone back and scrolled through another document. Every person who got fired signed an NDA. Every person who quit was too scared to say anything because they needed the reference for their next job. And the people who accepted her offers, they're not going to blow the whistle on a system that's advancing their careers. Ethan ran his hands through his hair. So what do we do? Go to the board of directors? Victoria Hale owns 40% of the company. The board answers to her, not the other way around. We'd need ironclad proof. And even then, David shook his head, corporate boards protect their own, especially when the CEO is making them all rich. The media? Without proof, it's just disgruntled former employees making accusations. She'd bury us in defamation lawsuits before we could finish the first interview. Frustration welled up in Ethan's chest. Then why did you contact me? If there's nothing we can do... I didn't say there was nothing we could do. I said we need proof. David leaned forward, his voice dropping. Here's the thing, Ethan. You did something none of the others did. You responded to her message, in writing, with a clear rejection. Ethan pulled out his phone and brought up the message thread. I didn't miss out. I chose integrity. This is inappropriate, and I'm not interested. Please don't contact me like this again. That's evidence, David said. That's you establishing in your own words that her message was unwanted and inappropriate. And then she fired you 8 hours later. That's retaliation. That's a pattern. That's the kind of thing that could actually stick. To do what with? I've been talking to lawyers, quietly. Most of them won't touch this because going up against someone like Victoria Hale is career suicide. But there's one, Rachel Park, who specializes in employment law and sexual harassment cases. She's good. She's tough. And she doesn't back down from powerful people. You want me to sue her? I want us to sue her, all of us, everyone on that list who's willing to come forward. David's eyes blazed with something Ethan recognized as the same anger he'd felt sitting in that conference room this morning. A class action lawsuit with 17 plaintiffs is a lot harder to dismiss than one disgruntled employee. And if we can get other people to join, people who are still working there, people who've witnessed this but were too scared to speak up, we might actually have a shot. Ethan looked down at his phone, at the message thread that had cost him everything. I have a daughter, he said quietly. I have rent due in 11 days and exactly $800 in my checking account. I can't afford to spend the next year fighting a legal battle against a billionaire CEO. I know, believe me, I know. David's voice softened. I'm living in my sister's basement right now. I had to sell my car to make last month's student loan payment. I'm working part-time at a grocery store because it's the only place that would hire me without calling my references. This has destroyed my life, Ethan. But if we don't fight back, she's going to keep doing this to other people. The weight of that statement settled over the table like fog. Ethan thought about Maya asking him why he didn't work at his old job anymore. He'd told her the company was making changes, and he was looking for new opportunities. She'd accepted the explanation with the easy trust of an 8-year-old who still believed her father could fix anything. What would he tell her when the rent check bounced? When they had to move to a cheaper apartment? When he couldn't afford her school supplies or her field trips or the science museum she'd been begging to visit? But what would he tell her if she ever found out the truth? That he'd had a chance to stand up against something wrong and he'd chosen silence instead? Tell me about this lawyer, Ethan said finally. David's expression shifted. Relief, determination, something fierce and almost desperate. Rachel Park, 42 years old. Made partner at her firm by age 35, then left to start her own practice focusing exclusively on employment discrimination and harassment cases. She's won settlements against 3 Fortune 500 companies in the last 4 years alone. And she thinks we have a case? She thinks we might. I met with her last week and showed her the evidence I've collected. She was interested but cautious. The problem is, most of the people on my list signed NDAs. They can't testify without violating their agreements, and Victoria's lawyers would shred them for it. But I didn't sign. Exactly. You're clean. You can talk about what happened without any legal consequences. And your message thread is gold, Ethan. It's contemporaneous evidence. It shows clear rejection of unwanted sexual advances, followed by immediate termination. That's textbook retaliation. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced down. A text from Mrs. Chen asking when he'd be back to pick up Maya. The ordinary world still spinning despite everything falling apart. "What would I have to do?" he asked. "Meet with Rachel. Tell her your story. Let her review the evidence. If she thinks we have a case, she'll start building it. She works on contingency for cases like this, which means we don't pay unless we win. And if we lose," David's jaw set, "then at least we tried. At least we did something other than let her get away with it." Ethan looked at his coffee, long since gone cold. Through the window, he could see people walking past on the sidewalk, people going home from work, meeting friends for dinner, living their normal lives. He thought about Victoria Hale in her corner office, probably already moving on to her next target, confident that fear and NDAs would keep everyone quiet. He thought about the 17 names on David's spreadsheet, 17 careers destroyed, 17 people who'd probably felt exactly like he did right now, angry, scared, trapped. "When can I meet her?" Ethan asked. "Rachel Park." David pulled out his phone. "I'll call her right now." 20 minutes later, they had an appointment scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Ethan left the coffee shop feeling like he'd just jumped off a cliff, uncertain whether he'd find solid ground or empty air below. The drive back to Mrs. Da Chen's apartment was short. Maya was in the middle of a Uno game with Mrs. Chen's grandson when Ethan arrived, her face bright with concentration as she tried to decide which card to play. "Dad," she called without looking up, "I'm winning." "That's great, sweetheart." Ethan managed a smile. 5 more minutes, okay?" Mrs. Chen walked him to the doorway. "Everything okay? You look tired." "Long day," Ethan said. She studied him with the knowing eyes of someone who'd raised 3 children and buried a husband. "You know, my late husband used to say that the hardest decisions are usually the right ones." Ethan blinked. You don't have to tell me anything, but whatever you're dealing with, I hope you know you're not alone. And that little girl in there?" She nodded toward Maya. "She's lucky to have you." Something in Ethan's chest tightened. He thanked Mrs. Chen, collected Maya, and drove home through streets blurred by streetlights and exhaustion. That night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open, staring at a blank document. He titled it Timeline, Victoria Hale. Then he started writing everything he could remember. The text message, the conference room meeting, every word Victoria and Jennifer had said, the implied threats, the manufactured accusations. He wrote for 2 hours, documenting every detail while it was still fresh in his mind. At midnight, he saved the document and sent a copy to his personal email. Then he backed it up to 3 different cloud storage services. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. His phone buzzed. David Brennan. Rachel just confirmed the meeting, 9 a.m. at her office downtown. Address attached. "Thank you for this, Ethan. Seriously." Ethan stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed, "Thank you for reaching out. I'll be there." He set his phone down and looked around his small apartment. The rent was due in 11 days. His severance, if Victoria even honored the reduced package, would cover maybe half of it. But sitting here in the quiet darkness, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. Not peace exactly, not certainty, but a sense that he was finally moving in the right direction. Even if that direction led straight into a fight, he had no guarantee of winning. The next morning arrived too quickly. Ethan dropped Maya at school, watched her disappear through the gates, and then drove downtown to an office building that looked like a dozen others, glass, steel, and the kind of corporate anonymity that suggested serious business happened inside. Rachel Park's office was on the 7th floor. The reception area was small but immaculate, decorated with framed newspaper articles highlighting various legal victories. Ethan recognized a few of the headlines, major settlements that had made national news. "Mr. Cole?" The receptionist smiled. "Ms. Park is ready for you. Conference room 2, down the hall on your left." David was already there, sitting across from a woman who looked exactly like someone who'd made partner by age 35. Rachel Park was petite, sharply dressed, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that seemed to catalog everything about Ethan in the 3 seconds it took him to walk from the door to the table. Ethan Cole? She said, standing to shake his hand. Her grip was firm. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. Ethan sat. Rachel slid a legal pad in front of her, pen poised. David has given me an overview of your situation, but I'd like to hear it directly from you. Start from the beginning, the night you received the message. So Ethan told her. He walked her through every detail. The late-night text, the photograph, his response, the morning meeting, Victoria's threats, the severance offer he'd refused. Rachel took notes in shorthand, stopping him occasionally to ask clarifying questions. What exact words did Victoria use when she terminated you? She said my position was being eliminated due to restructuring, but HR later mentioned conduct unbecoming and failure to maintain professional boundaries. Yes, when I questioned the timing. Did they put any of these accusations in writing? No, everything was verbal except the severance agreement I didn't sign. Rachel made a note. And you still have the original text message thread? Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her. She studied it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she took several photos of the screen with her own phone. This is good, she said finally. This is very good. Your response establishes clear boundaries and unwanted contact. The timing of your termination, 8 hours later, establishes a credible claim of retaliation. So, we have a case? David asked. You might. Rachel set down her pen. But I need you both to understand what you're getting into. Victoria Hale is not just wealthy and powerful. She's vindictive. If we move forward with this, she will come at you with everything she has. She'll dig into your past, looking for anything she can use against you. She'll try to destroy your credibility, your reputation, everything. She's already destroyed my career, Ethan said. So far. But if you sue her, she'll go further. She'll make sure every potential employer in your field knows your name and associates it with being a troublemaker. She'll drag this case out for years if she can, trying to bleed you dry financially and emotionally until you give up. Then why are you taking the case? Ethan asked. Rachel's expression hardened. Because I've seen too many powerful people get away with this kind of behavior. Because the law is supposed to protect employees from retaliation and sexual harassment, but it only works if people are brave enough to use it. And because I think you might actually have a shot at winning. She pulled out a folder and opened it. David has identified 17 potential plaintiffs. If even half of them agree to join the lawsuit, we're looking at a class action with substantial damages. More importantly, we're looking at a pattern of behavior that becomes impossible to dismiss as a misunderstanding or a one-time mistake. What do we need to do? David asked. First, I need to verify your evidence. I'll need copies of the text messages, termination documents, anything in writing. Second, I need to contact the other people on your list and see who's willing to come forward despite their NDAs. I thought you said they couldn't testify without violating their agreements, Ethan said. They can't voluntarily, but if we subpoena them, they're legally obligated to respond truthfully under oath. Victoria's lawyers will fight it, but judges don't look kindly on ND as being used to cover up illegal conduct. Rachel closed the folder and looked directly at both of them. This will be hard. It will take months, maybe years. There will be depositions, interrogatories, motions to dismiss. Victoria will offer settlements designed to divide you and make some of you give up. She'll use every legal tactic available to drag this out and make your lives miserable. But, Ethan prompted, but if we build a strong enough case, if we get enough people to come forward, if we can show a clear pattern of harassment and retaliation, then we have a chance of not only winning damages, but forcing real change. Corporate boards pay attention when lawsuits get expensive enough, and nothing gets more expensive than a well-documented pattern of executive misconduct. Ethan looked at David, who nodded slightly. Then he looked back at Rachel. What do I need to sign? Rachel smiled, the first genuine warmth Ethan had seen from her. Let's start with a retainer agreement, then we'll get to work. The next 2 hours were a blur of paperwork, explanations of legal procedures, and strategic planning. By the time Ethan left Rachel's office, his head was spinning with terms like discovery, depositions, and summary judgment motions. But he also left with something he hadn't expected. Hope. Not the naive kind that assumed everything would work out fine, but the hard-earned kind that came from taking action instead of sitting passively while someone else controlled his fate. David walked him to the elevator. "Thank you," David said quietly, "for showing up, for being willing to do this." "I haven't done anything yet." "You did more than you know." David pressed the elevator button. Most people, when they got that severance offer, would have signed it just to make the pain stop. You didn't. That takes guts. The elevator arrived. "I'll call you tomorrow," David said. "Rachel's going to start reaching out to people on the list. The more who join us, the stronger we are." Ethan stepped into the elevator. "What if nobody else comes forward?" "Then we fight anyway." David's expression was resolute. "But I don't think we'll be alone. Not anymore." The doors closed. Ethan rode down to the lobby, walked out into the bright morning sunlight, and checked his phone. 2 missed calls from the same unknown number. No voicemail. He was about to dismiss them when the phone rang again. Same number. Ethan answered. "Hello? Is this Ethan Cole?" The voice was female, young, nervous. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I used to work at Apex Innovations. David Brennan gave me your number." I heard you're building a case against Victoria Hale." Ethan's heart rate picked up. Sarah Mitchell. He'd seen her name on David's spreadsheet. Finance department. Terminated 4 months ago. "That's right," Ethan said carefully. "I want to help." Sarah's voice shook slightly. "I signed an NDA, but I don't care anymore. What she did to me, what she's doing to people, it has to stop. Whatever you need from me, I'll do it." Ethan closed his eyes. "Have you talked to Rachel Park yet?" "I'm calling her next. I just wanted to talk to you first, to make sure this is real, that people are actually fighting back." "It's real," Ethan said. "And we're fighting back." Sarah exhaled shakily. "Good. Because I've been carrying this for 4 months, and I'm tired of being scared." They talked for another 10 minutes. Sarah told her story, similar to David's, similar to Ethan's, the same devastating pattern. By the time they hung up, Ethan felt something shift. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every person Victoria Hale had manipulated, threatened, and destroyed. And for the first time since receiving that text message, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, he had the power to do something about it. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel Park. "Sarah Mitchell just called. That makes 3. Let's keep building." Ethan looked up at the sky. Clear and blue and endless. Then he got in his car and drove to pick up Maya from school, ready to face whatever came next. Because sometimes the right thing and the hard thing were exactly the same, and Ethan Cole had already made his choice. 3 became 4. 4 became 7. Within 2 weeks, Rachel Park's conference room had transformed into something that looked less like a law office and more like a war room. The walls were covered with timeline charts, organizational diagrams showing Apex Innovations' corporate structure, and printed copies of text messages that all followed the same disturbing pattern. Each new voice that joined added another layer to the evidence, another crack in the facade Victoria Hale had built around herself. Ethan sat at the conference table on a Tuesday afternoon listening to a woman named Jennifer Kwan tell her story. She was 31, a former software engineer who'd worked at Apex for 18 months before receiving the message that changed everything. "It was different than yours," Jennifer said, her fingers wrapped tightly around a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. "The photo was different, more explicit. And the message said, 'You deserve more than you're getting,' like she was doing me a favor." Rachel took notes without looking up. "What time did you receive it?" 1:17 a.m. I was still awake, working on a deployment that was supposed to go live the next morning. I thought maybe I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. "Did you respond?" David asked from across the table. Jennifer shook her head. "I deleted it. Just deleted the whole message thread and pretended it never happened. I showed up to work the next day and buried myself in code, hoping that if I ignored it, it would go away." "When did you realize it wouldn't?" Ethan asked gently. 3 days later. I got called into a one-on-one with my manager. He told me there had been complaints about my attitude and my inability to be a team player, which was insane because I just led a major project that came in ahead of schedule and under budget. Jennifer's voice cracked slightly. He offered me a choice: take a demotion to a junior position with a 30% pay cut, or resign voluntarily. "Did he put the complaints in writing?" Rachel asked. No. He said they were verbal feedback from multiple sources, but he wouldn't tell me who or what they'd actually said. It was all vague enough that I couldn't defend myself against it. And you chose to resign. I was terrified. I thought if I took the demotion, they'd just find another reason to push me out later. At least if I resigned, I could say it was my choice. Jennifer set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. I signed their separation agreement because I needed the reference. I needed to be able to tell the next employer that I'd left on good terms. But the truth is, I haven't been able to find another engineering job since. Every interview goes fine until they ask why I left my last position. I tell them I was looking for new challenges, and they smile and nod, and then I never hear from them again. Rachel looked up from her notes. Have you asked what your reference from Apex actually says? I'm afraid to know. We'll subpoena your personnel file. If they're giving negative references based on fabricated complaints, that's defamation on top of everything else. Rachel made another notation. Jennifer, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you prepared for Victoria Hale's lawyers to dig into every aspect of your life, your work history, your personal relationships, your finances? They're going to look for anything they can use to discredit you. Jennifer's jaw set. Let them look. I've got nothing to hide. What about the NDA you signed? I don't care anymore. I've been silent for 8 months and it's eating me alive. If breaking the NDA means I can finally tell the truth, then I'll deal with whatever consequences come. Rachel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, we'll file a motion arguing that the NDA is unenforceable because it was used to cover up illegal conduct. It'll be a fight, but it's one we can win. After Jennifer left, Ethan stayed behind while Rachel organized her notes. David had already gone, heading to yet another job interview that probably wouldn't lead anywhere. That's 7, Ethan said quietly. 7 people who've come forward. 8, actually. Marcus Rivera called this morning. He's flying in from Phoenix tomorrow to give his deposition. Rachel looked up. The pattern is undeniable now, Ethan. 8 people, all with similar stories, all terminated or forced out within days of rejecting Victoria's advances. This isn't a case anymore. It's a prosecution. When do we file? Next week. I want to get a few more depositions on record first, and I'm still waiting for the forensic analysis of the phone records. Rachel hesitated. There's something else you should know. Victoria's legal team reached out yesterday. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Already? She knows we're building something. Word travels fast in corporate circles, especially when multiple former employees start talking to the same lawyer. Rachel pulled out a letter and slid it across the table. They're offering a settlement for all current plaintiffs, $200,000 each in exchange for dropping the case and signing an expanded NDA. Ethan stared at the number. $200,000. That was more money than he'd seen in his entire life. That was rent for years. That was Maya's college fund. That was the security he'd been desperately chasing since the moment he lost his job. What did you tell them? I told them I'd present the offer to my clients and let them decide. Rachel's expression was carefully neutral. Ethan, I need you to understand something. This is a good offer, more than good. Most harassment cases settle for far less, especially this early in the process. If you take this money, you can rebuild your life without the stress and uncertainty of a trial. But settlements like this come with conditions. You'd have to agree never to discuss what happened, never to disparage Victoria or Apex Innovations, never to cooperate with any future investigations or lawsuits. Essentially, you'd be buying your silence with money that Victoria can easily afford. Ethan thought about the timeline on Rachel's wall, the names of 17 people whose careers had been destroyed, the others who probably existed but were too scared to come forward. If we take the money, she gets away with it. Yes, and she'll keep doing this to other people. Almost certainly. Ethan looked down at the letter, at the dollar amount that could solve all his immediate problems while leaving the root cause untouched. I need to think about it, he said finally. Of course. Talk to the others. Make whatever decision is right for you. Rachel stood, gathering her files. For what it's worth, Ethan, I hope you say no. Cases like this don't come along often, cases where we actually have enough evidence to hold powerful people accountable. But I also know you have a daughter to support and bills to pay. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. That night, Ethan called David. $200,000, David repeated, his voice strange and distant. That's life-changing money. Are you thinking about taking it? Silence stretched between them for several long seconds. I don't know, David admitted. Part of me thinks I'd be stupid not to. I could pay off my debts, get my own place again, stop feeling like a complete failure every time my sister looks at me with that pitying expression. And the other part? The other part remembers what it felt like to open that message, to realize that someone with that much power thought they could just use me, like I was a thing instead of a person. David's voice hardened. The other part wants to watch her empire burn. Rachel says if we settle, she'll just keep doing this. I know, and there's probably already someone else, some other employee she's targeting right now, thinking nobody will ever challenge her because nobody ever has. Ethan walked to Maya's bedroom door and looked in at his sleeping daughter. She was curled up with their stuffed rabbit, peaceful and innocent and completely unaware that her father was deciding between financial security and a fight he might not win. What would you tell Maya? David asked, as if reading his thoughts. When she's older, when she asks what you did when you had the chance to stand up to a bully. That's not fair. No, it's not. None of this is fair. But it's the question we have to answer anyway. Ethan closed Maya's door gently. I'm going to call Rachel tomorrow and tell her no. I'm not taking the settlement. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He heard David exhale shakily. Then I guess I'm in too. Might as well go down swinging. By the end of the week, all 8 plaintiffs had refused the settlement offer. Victoria's lawyers responded with a motion to dismiss the entire case, arguing that the claims were baseless, that the text messages were taken out of context, and that all employment decisions had been made for legitimate business reasons, having nothing to do with any alleged misconduct. Rachel filed an opposition brief that was 47 pages long and contained enough documented evidence to make even the most skeptical judge take notice. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Ethan's life had become a strange bifurcation of the mundane and the surreal. During the day, he sent out job applications, went to interviews, and tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Maya's sake. At night, he reviewed legal documents, gave statements to Rachel's investigators, and tried not to think about the bills piling up faster than his dwindling savings could cover. His sister Claire called from Seattle on a Thursday evening. Mom told me you lost your job, she said without preamble. Why didn't you tell me yourself? Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. I was going to. I've just been dealing with a lot. She said you got fired. That doesn't sound like you. What happened? For a moment, Ethan considered telling her everything. Claire was a lawyer herself, working in corporate law for a firm that represented tech companies. She'd understand the legal complexities, the stakes, the risks, but she'd also probably tell him he was being an idiot for turning down $200,000. There was a disagreement about company direction, he said carefully. It wasn't a good fit anymore. A disagreement serious enough to get you fired? It's complicated. Ethan, Claire's voice softened. Are you okay? Financially, I mean. If you need help with rent or... I'm fine. I've got some savings. And I'm interviewing. How's Maya handling it? She doesn't really understand what's happening. I told her I'm looking for a better job. Claire was quiet for a moment. You know you can always ask for help, right? You don't have to do everything alone. I know. Thanks, Claire. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the darkness of his living room and wondered how long he could maintain the illusion that everything was under control. The answer came faster than expected. On Monday morning, Ethan opened his mailbox to find a letter from his landlord. Rent had increased by $400 a month, effective immediately. A coincidence of timing, the letter claimed, due to market conditions and property improvements. Ethan called the landlord directly. Mr. Peterson, I've been a tenant here for 3 years. I've never been late on rent. $400 is a massive increase. I'm sorry, Mr. Cole, but the decision has been made. If the new rate doesn't work for you, I understand. You're welcome to move out at the end of your current lease term. That's in 6 weeks. Then you have time to make arrangements. Ethan's hands tightened on the phone. Did someone contact you about me? Someone from my former employer? A pause. I'm not at liberty to discuss my business relationships. The rent increase stands. Good day, Mr. Cole. The line went dead. Ethan stared at his phone, rage building in his chest. This was Victoria's doing. It had to be. The timing was too perfect, the increase too calculated. She was using every lever of power available to her, trying to force him into a corner where taking her settlement money would be the only logical choice. He called Rachel immediately. Can she do this? Can she really reach into my personal life like this? Rachel's voice was grim, proving it would be almost impossible. Unless your landlord is willing to testify that someone from Apex contacted him, which I doubt, it just looks like unfortunate timing. This is the kind of pressure campaign I warned you about. She's going to make your life as difficult as possible until you give up. I'm not giving up. Then we need to move faster. The hearing is in 2 weeks. If we can survive until then, if the judge denies her motion to dismiss, we'll have momentum. Discovery will start, we'll subpoena her communications, and we'll be able to build a case strong enough that she won't be able to bury it. And if the judge grants the motion, then the case ends before it really begins, and Victoria Hale goes back to business as usual. After hanging up, Ethan sat at his kitchen table and did the math. Even without the rent increase, his savings would run out in 6 weeks. With the increase, he had maybe 4 weeks before he'd have to make impossible choices about which bills to pay. He opened his laptop and started searching for cheaper apartments, for second jobs, for any possible way to keep his head above water long enough to see this through. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Still think integrity is worth more than a paycheck? Ethan's blood went cold. He checked the number. It wasn't Victoria's. It was completely unknown. Probably a burner phone or a spoofed caller ID. Another text came through. You had a chance to walk away. You chose this. Remember that when you're explaining to your daughter why you can't afford her school supplies. Ethan's hands shook. He wanted to throw his phone across the room, to scream, to do something that would release the pressure building in his chest. Instead, he took a screenshot of the messages and forwarded them to Rachel with a simple note. More evidence. The harassment continued. Over the next week, Ethan received 6 more anonymous messages, each one more pointed than the last. Someone left a printed copy of his employment termination notice on his car windshield. A box of his belongings from Apex, things he'd never actually owned, was delivered to his apartment with a note saying, "You forgot something." David reported similar incidents. So did Jennifer. So did 3 of the other plaintiffs. Victoria was waging psychological warfare, trying to break them down before the hearing. Rachel documented everything, every message, every incident, every piece of evidence that Victoria's legal team probably thought would be untraceable. She built a supplemental brief arguing that the harassment campaign itself proved the retaliation claims. The night before the hearing, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, playing out every possible scenario. The judge dismissing the case, the judge letting it proceed, Victoria's lawyers ripping apart their evidence, Rachel's methodical destruction of every argument Victoria made. At 2 a.m., he gave up on sleep and went to check on Maya. She was awake, sitting up in bed with her stuffed rabbit. "Dad, why aren't you sleeping?" Ethan sat down on the edge of her bed. "Just thinking about work stuff." "What about you? Why are you up?" "I had a bad dream." "Want to tell me about it?" Maya hugged her rabbit tighter. "We had to move away, and I couldn't take any of my things, and you were really sad." Ethan's heart clenched. Kids were perceptive. No matter how hard he tried to shield her from the stress, she was picking up on it. "Hey," he said softly, "we're not going anywhere, okay? And even if we did have to move someday, we take all your important things with us. Your books, your toys, definitely Mr. Hops." He tapped the rabbit's nose. "Promise?" Ethan thought about the hearing tomorrow, about the rent increase, about the savings account draining away like water through his fingers. He thought about all the promises he couldn't guarantee he'd be able to keep. But he looked at his daughter's worried face and said, "I promise that no matter what happens, we're going to be okay. Because we have each other." Maya seemed to accept this. She lay back down, and Ethan stayed with her until her breathing evened out and sleep finally claimed her. Then he went back to his own room, set his alarm for 6 a.m., and closed his eyes, trying to find whatever reservoir of strength he'd need to face tomorrow. The courthouse was downtown, an imposing building of stone and glass that seemed designed to make people feel small. Ethan arrived at 8:30, wearing the only suit he owned, feeling like an imposter playing at being someone important enough to challenge a corporate empire. Rachel was already there, standing outside the courtroom with David and 4 of the other plaintiffs. She looked calm, composed, every inch the seasoned litigator. "Everyone ready?" she asked. A chorus of nervous affirmatives. "Remember, this is just the motion to dismiss hearing. We're not presenting the full case today. I'll be arguing why the case should be allowed to proceed, and Victoria's lawyers will argue why it shouldn't. The judge will ask questions, and then he'll make a ruling, either today or within a few weeks." "What are our chances?" Sarah asked. "Honestly, 50-50. Judge Morrison is fair but conservative. He doesn't like frivolous lawsuits, but he also doesn't like corporations abusing their power. It's going to come down to whether he thinks we have enough evidence to survive the motion." The courtroom doors opened. Inside, the space was smaller than Ethan had expected from watching TV shows. There were benches for observers, tables for the lawyers, and a raised platform for the judge. The whole thing felt simultaneously formal and strangely intimate. Victoria Hale was already there. She sat at the defendant's table with 3 lawyers in expensive suits, looking completely unbothered by the proceedings. When Ethan entered, her eyes found him immediately. She didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't show any emotion whatsoever. She simply looked at him the way someone might look at an insect, a minor annoyance barely worth acknowledging. Ethan forced himself to look away and take his seat behind Rachel's table. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Harold Morrison presiding. The judge entered, a man in his early 60s with gray hair and the kind of world-weary expression that suggested he'd seen every legal argument at least twice. "Be seated. We're here today on the matter of Cole versus Apex Innovations and Victoria Hale, case number CV-2-024-7832. This is a hearing on the defendant's motion to dismiss. Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" Victoria's lead attorney stood. His name was Richard Thornton, and according to Rachel's research, he billed $800 an hour and had a reputation for crushing employment discrimination cases before they ever reached trial. "Ready, Your Honor." Rachel stood. "Ready, Your Honor." "Mr. Thornton, you filed the motion. You may begin." What followed was 2 hours of legal arguments that made Ethan's head spin. Thornton argued that the plaintiffs had failed to state a claim upon which relief could be granted, that the text messages were protected speech, that employment decisions made by executives were entitled to deference, and that allowing the case to proceed would open the floodgates to frivolous harassment claims from every disgruntled employee in America. He was smooth, confident, and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. Rachel countered with methodical precision. She walked the judge through the timeline, showing the pattern of behavior. She quoted employment law precedents. She argued that the text messages, combined with immediate terminations, created a clear inference of retaliation that deserved full discovery and trial. Judge Morrison asked pointed questions of both sides. "Ms. Park, your clients claim they were terminated in retaliation for rejecting sexual advances. But don't employees get fired for legitimate business reasons all the time?" "They do, Your Honor. But when 8 separate employees all report receiving sexually explicit messages from the same executive, and all 8 were terminated within days of rejecting those advances, the pattern becomes statistically improbable to explain through coincidence." "Mr. Thornton, you argue these messages were taken out of context. What context makes a CEO sending explicit photos to subordinate employees appropriate?" "Your Honor, we're not conceding that the messages were inappropriate. We're saying that even if they were, the plaintiffs haven't shown causation between the messages and their terminations. Correlation is not causation. Unless the correlation is strong enough to support an inference, which is exactly what summary judgment standards are designed to address." Back and forth they went, legal chess played at the highest level. Ethan watched Victoria throughout. She never moved, never reacted, never showed the slightest concern. It was as if the whole proceeding was beneath her notice. Finally, Judge Morrison held up his hand. "I've heard enough. This is a complex case with serious allegations on both sides. I'm not prepared to rule from the bench today. I'll issue a written opinion within 2 weeks. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. It was over. For now. Outside the courthouse, the plaintiffs gathered on the steps while Rachel explained what would happen next. 2 weeks is actually a good sign," she said. "If he was planning to dismiss outright, he probably would have done it today. The fact that he's taking time to write an opinion suggests he's seriously considering our arguments. Or he's trying to find a nice way to tell us we're wasting his time, David muttered. Possible, but I don't think so. Did you see how he pushed back on Thornton's causation argument? He understands the pattern evidence matters. Ethan looked back at the courthouse. Through the glass doors, he could see Victoria Hale walking out with her legal team, still looking completely unruffled. She paused on the steps, said something to Richard Thornton, and then looked directly at where Ethan was standing. For just a moment, their eyes met. And then Victoria smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who'd played this game 1,000 times and knew all the ways it could end. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into a waiting car. Don't let her get in your head, Rachel said quietly. She wants you to think she's invincible. That's part of the intimidation. What if she is? Ethan asked. Then we'll be the first ones to prove otherwise. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of Ethan's life. He existed in a state of suspended animation, unable to move forward, but unable to go back. Job interviews dried up completely. Word had clearly spread through industry channels that he was involved in litigation against his former employer. His savings dwindled to dangerously low levels. But something else was happening too. More people were coming forward. 2 current Apex employees still working at the company reached out through anonymous channels to provide information. They couldn't join the lawsuit without losing their jobs, but they could provide documentation. Emails showing Victoria's executive assistant booking late-night meetings with various employees. Calendar entries that mysteriously disappeared. Expense reports for hotel rooms that didn't match any business travel. The evidence kept building, each piece adding weight to the case. On day 13, Ethan's phone rang at 4 in the afternoon. Rachel Park. The judge issued his ruling, she said. Ethan's heart stopped. And? Motion to dismiss denied. The case proceeds to discovery. Ethan, we won. The case is going forward. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Relief, fear, and determination crashed over him in waves. What happens now? Now the real fight begins. We'll start depositions next month. We'll subpoena Victoria's phone records, her emails, her calendar. We'll depose every executive and HR representative involved in the termination decisions, and Victoria and her lawyers will fight us every step of the way. How long until trial? 8 months, maybe a year. These things take time. I don't know if I can hold out that long. Rachel's voice softened. I know, but you've made it this far. And now we have momentum. The judge's ruling is public record. The media is going to pick this up. People are going to start asking questions Victoria doesn't want to answer. That night, Ethan told Maya they needed to have a conversation. They sat together on the couch, and he explained in 8-year-old terms that they might need to move to a smaller apartment for a while. That things were going to be tight, but they'd be okay. Maya listened seriously, then asked, Is it because of your old job? Yeah, honey, it is. Are you fighting with them? Ethan chose his words carefully. I'm trying to make sure they don't hurt other people the way they hurt me. Sometimes doing the right thing is expensive. Maya thought about this. Then she said, When I grow up, I want to be like you. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Why's that? Because you're brave. He pulled her into a hug. This small person who believed in him even when he struggled to believe in himself. And in that moment, Ethan knew he'd made the right choice, even if it cost him everything. The news broke 3 days after Judge Morrison's ruling. Ethan was sitting in a McDonald's parking lot sharing chicken nuggets with Maya after picking her up from school, when David called. Turn on the news, any channel, right now. Ethan fumbled for his phone, pulling up a news app. The headline hit him like a physical blow. Tech CEO Victoria Hale faces class action. Lawsuit alleging pattern of sexual harassment and retaliation. Below it, a smaller subheading, 8 former employees claim systematic abuse of power at Apex Innovations. Dad? Maya looked up from her nuggets. What's wrong? Ethan forced his expression neutral. Nothing, sweetheart. Just work stuff. Finish your food, okay? He stepped out of the car, phone pressed to his ear. How did this get out so fast? Court documents are public record, David said. Some reporter must have been monitoring the docket. It's everywhere, Ethan. CNN, Bloomberg, TechCrunch. Everyone's running the story. Ethan's hands were shaking. Part of him had known this moment was coming, had wanted it even. But seeing it actually happen, seeing their private nightmare splashed across headlines for the world to consume, was entirely different from imagining it. What do we do? Rachel says we don't comment. Not yet. Let the story develop on its own. Victoria's PR team is probably scrambling right now. David was right. By evening, Apex Innovations had released a statement calling the allegations baseless and defamatory, insisting that all employment decisions had been made in accordance with company policy and business needs, and promising to vigorously defend against these meritless claims. Victoria herself remained silent, but the internet had no such restraint. Within hours, the story had exploded across social media. Tech industry forums buzzed with speculation. Anonymous accounts claiming to be current and former Apex employees began sharing their own stories, adding fuel to a fire that was rapidly spinning beyond anyone's control. Ethan's phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters, bloggers, people claiming to be documentary filmmakers. Rachel had warned them this would happen, had coached them on how to handle media attention, had made them all promise not to speak to anyone without her approval. Every word you say can and will be used against you, she'd warned. Victoria's team will twist anything they can into evidence that you're lying or seeking attention or trying to shake her down for money. So for now, we stay silent and let the facts speak for themselves. The facts were speaking loudly. By the end of the week, 2 more former employees had contacted Rachel, bringing the total number of plaintiffs to 10. A reporter for a major business publication was working on an investigative piece that would take a deeper dive into Apex's corporate culture. And most significantly, the company's stock price had dropped 7% in 3 days. Money, it turned out, spoke louder than any press release. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Ethan knew about it because one of the anonymous inside sources sent Rachel a copy of the meeting agenda. Item 1, allegations against CEO, risk assessment and response strategy. They're running scared, Rachel said during an emergency conference call with all the plaintiffs. The negative press is starting to affect their bottom line. Investors are asking questions. Corporate clients are getting nervous about being associated with Apex. So what does that mean for us? Jennifer asked. It means we have leverage, real leverage, not just legal arguments, but public pressure. The kind of pressure that boards of directors actually care about because it threatens their profits. Will they force her to resign? Sarah's voice was hopeful. Maybe. But more likely, they'll try to contain the damage. Expect another settlement offer, probably a much bigger one. They'll want to make this go away before the investigative journalism really starts digging. Rachel was right. 2 days later, Richard Thornton called with a new proposal, $5 million, split among all 10 plaintiffs. In exchange for dropping the lawsuit, signing expanded NDAs, and issuing a joint statement saying the matter had been resolved amicably to the satisfaction of all parties. Rachel presented the offer during an in-person meeting at her office. All 10 plaintiffs were there, crammed into the conference room that had become their de facto headquarters. $5 million, David repeated, doing the math in his head. That's $500,000 each. The room went silent. $500,000 was life-changing money. It was paying off debt, buying a house, sending kids to college, never having to worry about rent or medical bills again. It was everything most of them had been chasing their entire adult lives. There's a catch, Rachel said. Beyond the NDAs, they want you to sign affidavits stating that Victoria never engaged in any inappropriate conduct, that all employment decisions were made for legitimate business reasons, and that you initiated this lawsuit based on misunderstandings that have since been resolved. They want us to lie, Ethan said flatly. They want you to recant, to say publicly that you were wrong, that Victoria did nothing wrong, and that this was all a big mistake. Marcus Rivera, the former sales manager from Phoenix, stood up abruptly. That's insane. They're asking us to commit perjury for money. Technically, it wouldn't be perjury because you wouldn't be under oath. It would just be creative revisionism. Rachel's tone made it clear what she thought of that distinction. But yes, you'd essentially be selling your credibility and your truth in exchange for money. What happens if we refuse? Jennifer asked. Then we proceed to discovery and depositions, which means the next 6 months of your lives will be consumed by this case. You'll be deposed by Victoria's lawyers, who will ask you invasive questions about every aspect of your personal and professional lives. They'll subpoena your emails, your text messages, your social media posts. They'll interview your friends, your family, your former colleagues. And they'll use everything they find to try to discredit you in front of a jury. Rachel let that sink in before continuing. I need you all to understand what you're signing up for if you say no to this settlement. This won't be easy. It won't be clean. Victoria has unlimited resources and a team of lawyers whose entire job is to destroy your credibility. Some of you might not survive the process intact. But we could win, Sarah said quietly. We could actually win and force her out. Maybe, if we build a strong enough case, if the jury believes you, if the judge doesn't grant summary judgment, if a dozen other things break our way. Rachel looked around the room. I won't lie to you. Even with all our evidence, trials are unpredictable. Juries are unpredictable. We could do everything right and still lose. Ethan thought about Maya, about the apartment they'd have to leave in 3 weeks because he couldn't afford the increased rent. He thought about the job offers that never came, the interviews that ended in polite rejections, the slow erosion of his savings account. $500,000 would solve all of that, but it would also mean looking his daughter in the eye someday and explaining why he'd chosen money over truth. I vote no, Ethan said. David looked at him. You sure? I'm sure. If we take this money, we're not just selling our silence. We're helping her cover up what she did. And the next person she targets won't have any evidence to point to because we'll have actively participated in erasing the truth. Ethan's right, Jennifer said. I didn't come this far just to let her buy her way out of consequences. Around the room, heads began to nod. One by one, all 10 plaintiffs voted to reject the settlement offer. Rachel smiled, fierce and proud. Then let's go to war. The next phase of the case began immediately. Discovery requests flew back and forth like artillery shells. Rachel's team subpoenaed Victoria's phone records, email accounts, calendar entries, and expense reports. They demanded personnel files for every employee who'd been terminated in the past 3 years. They requested copies of all HR complaints, all performance reviews, all documentation related to the plaintiff's employment. Victoria's lawyers fought everything. They filed motion after motion claiming the requests were overly broad, irrelevant, privileged, or burdensome. They tried to limit the scope of discovery, to prevent Rachel from accessing certain documents, to delay depositions. Judge Morrison, to his credit, wasn't having it. Counselor, he told Richard Thornton during one particularly contentious hearing, your client is accused of a pattern of harassment spanning multiple years and involving multiple employees. Discovery is going to be extensive. If you have evidence that would refute these allegations, I suggest you produce it. Otherwise, stop wasting this court's time with procedural delays. The documents began to arrive, boxes and boxes of them. Email printouts, phone logs, HR files. Rachel hired 2 paralegals just to help organize and review everything. And buried in those thousands of pages, they found gold. An email from Victoria's executive assistant to the IT department requesting that certain text messages be deleted from the CEO's company phone per Ms. Hale's instructions. Calendar entries showing late-night meetings with employees who were later promoted or terminated, with no business justification for the timing. An HR memo expressing concern about irregular employment decisions that may expose the company to legal liability, which had been sent to Victoria and promptly ignored. Most damning of all, a recorded conversation between Victoria and her head of HR, discussing how to manage the optics of firing employees who had failed to demonstrate appropriate team spirit. The recording had been made by Jennifer Marks, the same HR director who'd sat silently during Ethan's termination meeting. Apparently, she'd started documenting things after becoming uncomfortable with what she was being asked to do. She'd quit Apex 2 months ago and had been waiting for the right moment to come forward. This is it, Rachel said, playing the recording for the 10th time in her office. This is the smoking gun. Victoria's voice came through clearly. I don't care what excuse you use, performance issues, cultural fit, reorganization. Just make sure they're gone by the end of the week and that the severance agreements include ironclad NDAs. Jennifer Marks's voice, tentative. Ms. Hale, if there are patterns in these terminations, it could create legal exposure. If multiple people we've let go all share certain characteristics, they share one characteristic, They weren't smart enough to understand how things work here. Now handle it. The recording ended. Ethan sat back in his chair, feeling something shift inside his chest. For months, he'd been running on faith and stubbornness, believing they were right, but never quite certain they could prove it. Now, he was certain. "When do we depose her?" David asked. 3 weeks? I've scheduled Victoria's deposition for June 15th. It'll be in a conference room at her attorney's office, and it'll probably last several days. Rachel's eyes glinted. I'm very much looking forward to it. The depositions of lower-level employees came first. HR representatives who'd processed terminations, managers who'd made the firing decisions, Victoria's executive assistant, who tried very hard to remember nothing and ended up contradicting herself 17 times in 4 hours. Each deposition added another piece to the puzzle Rachel was assembling, but the real showdown was coming. June 15th arrived with oppressive summer heat. Ethan, dressed in his suit despite the temperature, meeting David and Rachel outside the gleaming downtown office building that housed Thornton and Associates. "Remember," Rachel said as they rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, "you're here to observe, not participate. Don't react to anything Victoria says. Don't make faces. Don't shake your head. Don't give her lawyers anything they can use to claim you're biased or emotional." The conference room was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a table that could seat 20 people. A court reporter sat at one end, fingers poised over a stenography machine. 2 video cameras were positioned to capture everything from multiple angles, and at the center of it all sat Victoria Hale. She wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Ethan's car, her hair pulled back severely, her expression one of polite boredom. When Ethan entered, she didn't even glance in his direction. Richard Thornton and 2 associate attorneys flanked her. They had matching legal pads, matching pens, and matching expressions of barely concealed contempt. "Shall we begin?" Rachel said pleasantly. The court reporter swore Victoria in. The cameras started recording, and Rachel went to work. She started gently, establishing basic facts: Victoria's role at the company, her responsibilities, the corporate structure, how employment decisions were made. Victoria answered in carefully modulated tones, giving nothing away. Then Rachel shifted gears. "Ms. Hale, do you personally know the plaintiffs in this case?" "I'm aware of them as former employees." "Have you ever communicated with them directly?" "In the normal course of business, possibly." "What about outside normal business hours?" Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean." Rachel pulled out a printed document. "Let me refresh your recollection. On March 8th of this year at 11:47 p.m., did you send a text message to Ethan Cole?" "I don't recall." "You don't recall sending a text message to an employee at midnight?" "I communicate with many people at various times." "I don't memorize every message." Rachel slid the printed text message across the table. "Does this refresh your memory?" Victoria glanced at it. "I'd need to verify the authenticity of that document." "It came from your phone number. Are you saying someone else had access to your personal phone?" "I'm saying I don't recall this specific message." The message reads, "See what you could have had." Do you often send messages like that to subordinate employees? "I'm not confirming I sent that message." "But you're not denying it either." Thornton cut in. Objection. Argumentative. Rachel didn't miss a beat. "Ms. Hale, have you ever sent personal photographs to employees?" "No." "Never?" "Not that I recall." "So if I showed you evidence that you sent intimate photographs to 8 different employees, you would say that evidence was fabricated?" "I would say I have no memory of doing so." The dance continued for hours. Victoria deflected, claiming not to remember, refusing to confirm or deny, hiding behind carefully worded non-answers that her lawyers had obviously coached her to give. But Rachel was patient. She circled back, asked the same questions in different ways, introduced document after document that slowly built a cage around Victoria's denials. By hour 3, cracks were starting to show. "Ms. Hale, you testified earlier that you don't recall communicating with employees outside business hours, but we have phone records showing you sent text messages to 17 different employees between the hours of 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. over the past 2 years. Does that refresh your memory?" "I may have sent work-related messages." "At midnight?" "The tech industry operates on flexible schedules." And were all these messages work-related? To the best of my recollection, yes. Rachel pulled out another document. This is a text message you sent to David Brennan at 1:34 a.m. on November 12th. It reads, "You deserve more than you're getting. Is that work-related?" Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That could refer to compensation discussions. At 1:34 in the morning? I was reviewing performance data and felt compelled to reach out. And the photograph attached to that message? Was that also part of a compensation discussion? Thornton stood up. We're taking a break. My client needs to confer with counsel. Rachel checked her watch. We've only been going for 3 hours, counselor. Nevertheless, 15 minutes. The room emptied except for Rachel, Ethan, and David. The moment the door closed, David let out a breath he'd been holding. She's lying through her teeth. Of course she is, Rachel said calmly. But she's doing it under oath, and it's all being recorded. Every denial, every convenient memory lapse, every contradiction. When we get to trial, the jury will see all of this. Is it enough? Ethan asked. Not yet, but we're getting there. When the deposition resumed, Victoria was more guarded, more careful. Thornton had obviously coached her during the break to give even less away. But Rachel had saved her best material for last. Ms. Hale, are you familiar with your former head of HR, Jennifer Marks? Yes. Did she report directly to you? She did. Were you aware that she recorded certain conversations with you? For the first time, genuine emotion flickered across Victoria's face. I was not. Let me play one for you now. Rachel started the audio file. Victoria's voice filled the room, cold and commanding, discussing how to manage the optics of firing employees, telling Jennifer to make sure they're gone by end of week. The color drained from Victoria's face. Is that your voice, Ms. Hale? That recording was made without my knowledge or consent. But is it your voice? Victoria looked at her lawyers. Thornton's expression was grim. Yes, Victoria said finally. And in this recording, you instruct your HR director to terminate multiple employees quickly and ensure they sign NDAs. Is that correct? Context matters. You don't understand the full situation. Then please explain the context that makes those instructions appropriate. Those employees were underperforming. We needed to make organizational changes. All of them were underperforming? Yes. Even though their performance reviews show ratings of exceeds expectations, performance reviews don't tell the whole story. What do they leave out? Victoria's hands clenched on the table. Cultural fit, team dynamics, things that aren't easily quantified. Things like whether they responded appropriately to late-night text messages from the CEO. Objection. Thornton was on his feet. That question is inappropriate and assumes facts, not an evidence. Sustained, said the court reporter, though technically she had no authority to sustain anything. But the objection had been made, recorded for the record. Rachel pushed forward. Ms. Hale, you claim all these terminations were for legitimate business reasons. Yet we have evidence that every single plaintiff received personal communications from you outside business hours shortly before being terminated. How do you explain that pattern? Coincidence. 8 people, all terminated within days of receiving personal messages from you, and you're calling that coincidence? I'm calling it irrelevant. My communications are my own business. Not when they provide evidence of a pattern of harassment and retaliation. Victoria leaned forward, and for the first time, Ethan saw genuine anger flash in her eyes. These people want to blame me for their own failures. They couldn't handle the demands of working at a competitive company, so now they're making up stories to shake me down for money. It's pathetic. So they're all lying? They're all looking for a payday, including the ones who turned down a $5 million settlement offer? That stopped Victoria cold. She'd clearly expected them to take the money. The idea that they'd refused, that they'd chosen truth over profit, seemed to genuinely confuse her. That's their choice, she said finally. Indeed it is. Rachel closed her folder. No further questions. The deposition ended at 6:47 p.m., nearly 8 hours after it began. Victoria left without looking at anyone, her lawyers forming a protective barrier around her as they hurried to the elevators. Rachel gathered her materials methodically, her expression satisfied. How did we do? Ethan asked. We did very well. She committed herself to multiple positions that we can now attack with contradictory evidence. She denied things we can prove. She claimed not to remember things that are documented in her own phone records. And she made it very clear to anyone who watches that video that she has no remorse for what she did. What happens now? Now we prepare for trial. We have 4 months to finalize our witness list, prepare exhibits, and build the narrative we're going to present to the jury. Rachel looked at Ethan and David. This is really happening. We're going to trial. The realization settled over Ethan like gravity. For months, part of him had believed this would somehow resolve before reaching a courtroom. That Victoria would resign, or the company would settle for enough money that they couldn't refuse, or something would happen to make this all go away. But now there was no escape hatch, no easy resolution. Just 12 strangers in a jury box who would decide whether a corporate CEO had abused her power or whether 10 former employees were lying for profit. That night, Ethan sat in the small one-bedroom apartment he'd moved into 3 weeks earlier. It was in a worse neighborhood than his old place, smaller and cheaper, but it was what he could afford with the part-time security guard job he'd finally managed to find. Maya was asleep in the bedroom while Ethan made do with the couch. His phone buzzed, a text from Claire, his sister. Mom told me about the lawsuit. Jesus, Ethan, why didn't you tell me what was really going on? He stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Didn't want you to worry. I'm handling it. By suing your former CEO and living in a shoebox with your daughter, that's handling it? I made a choice. I can live with the consequences. What about Maya? What happens if you lose? That was the question that kept Ethan awake most nights. Then I lose, he typed, but at least I'll have tried. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Claire's response came through. I don't know if you're brave or crazy, but I hope you know what you're doing. Ethan looked around his cramped apartment, at the secondhand furniture and the water stain on the ceiling and the life he'd built on the rubble of the one Victoria had destroyed. Me too, he typed back. The weeks before trial passed in a blur of preparation. Rachel drilled them on testimony, warned them about cross-examination tactics, coached them on how to stay calm under pressure. They practiced answering the hardest questions Victoria's lawyers would throw at them. They're going to try to make you look greedy, Rachel warned. They'll ask why you didn't just move on and find another job. They'll point out that you're asking for money, so clearly this is all about profit, not justice. What do we say? Sarah asked. You tell the truth. That you tried to find other jobs but couldn't because of the references Apex gave. That you're asking for compensation because you lost real income and suffered real damages. And that money isn't the main goal. Accountability is. The trial was set to begin on October 3rd. 2 weeks before the start date, Ethan received a letter in the mail. No return address, just his name and current address printed on plain white paper. Inside was a single sheet with 3 sentences typed in the center. You still have time to walk away. Think about your daughter. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Ethan crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. Then he called Rachel and told her about it. She added it to the growing pile of evidence showing Victoria's intimidation campaign. On October 2nd, the night before opening statements, all 10 plaintiffs gathered at Rachel's office for a final meeting. Tomorrow, this becomes real, Rachel said. The media will be there. Victoria's supporters will be there. You're going to see your lives dissected in public. It's going to be brutal. Can we win? Marcus asked. Rachel looked around at each of them. These people who'd lost jobs, savings, homes, relationships, all because they'd refused to be complicit in their own degradation. Yes, she said simply. I think we can win, but only if you're ready to see this through to the end, no matter how ugly it gets. 10 heads nodded. Then let's make history. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay on his couch in the dark, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. A text message at 11:47 p.m. A choice between compliance and integrity. A single reply that had set everything else in motion. Tomorrow, he would walk into that courtroom and face Victoria Hale one final time. And whatever happened, he would do it knowing he'd chosen the harder right over the easier wrong. Maya stirred in the bedroom. Ethan got up to check on her and found her sitting up, rubbing her eyes. Can't sleep? He asked softly. I had another dream, but a good one this time.
Yeah, what happened? Maya smiled sleepily. You won. Ethan sat on the edge of her bed and smoothed her hair back. Won what? The fight. You won, and you were happy, and we got to stay here, and everything was okay. He kissed her forehead. Get some sleep, sweetheart. Big day tomorrow. For you? For both of us. Maya lay back down, and within minutes her breathing evened out again.
Ethan stayed there for a while, watching his daughter sleep, drawing strength from her simple faith that everything would work out. Then he went back to the couch and finally managed to close his eyes, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when Ethan arrived at 7:30 the next morning. Cameras tracked his movement from the moment he stepped out of David's car, microphones thrust forward like weapons as voices shouted questions he'd been instructed not to answer. Rachel met them at the entrance, her expression calm but her eyes sharp with focus. Ignore them, she said quietly. Head down, keep moving, don't engage. Inside, the courtroom was already filling up. Ethan recognized faces from the media, tech industry bloggers, people who'd followed the case from the beginning. In the back row sat several current Apex employees who'd taken personal days to watch the proceedings, their presence a silent show of support that meant more than Ethan could articulate. Victoria Hale was already seated at the defense table, flanked by Richard Thornton and 3 associate attorneys. She wore a charcoal gray suit and an expression of supreme confidence, as if this entire proceeding was merely an inconvenience she'd soon put behind her. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone rose. Please be seated. We're here in the matter of Cole versus Apex Innovations and Victoria Hale. Are both parties ready to proceed with opening statements? Ready, Your Honor, Rachel said. Ready, Your Honor, Thornton echoed. Ms. Park, you may begin. Rachel stood and walked to the jury box. She didn't carry notes. She simply looked at the 12 faces staring back at her, 6 men, 6 women, ranging in age from 23 to 67, and began to speak. Members of the jury, this case is about power. Specifically, it's about what happens when someone with absolute power in a workplace decides that power extends to the personal lives and bodies of the people who work for them. She gestured toward the plaintiff's table, where Ethan sat with David, Jennifer, Sarah, and the others. These 10 people worked for Apex Innovations, a successful tech company. They were good employees. Their performance reviews prove it. Their work product proves it. Their colleagues will testify to it. They should have had long, successful careers, but they didn't, because they all made the same mistake. Rachel paused, letting the silence build. They said no to Victoria Hale. She turned to look at Victoria, who met her gaze without flinching. The defendant will tell you that these terminations were business decisions, that these people were let go for performance issues, cultural fit, reorganization. But the evidence will show a different story. You're going to see text messages sent late at night from the CEO to subordinate employees. Messages that were sexual in nature, messages accompanied by explicit photographs. And you're going to see that every single person who rejected those advances was fired within days. Rachel walked along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. This isn't a case about he said, she said. This is a case about patterns, about power, about a CEO who believed she was untouchable and a system that protected her until these brave people decided to speak up. The evidence will show you exactly what happened. And when you've seen it all, we're going to ask you to do something simple. Hold Victoria Hale accountable for her actions. She returned to her seat. Thornton rose immediately, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. Ladies and gentlemen, my client is a successful businesswoman who built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. She's created hundreds of jobs. She's revolutionized her industry. And now she's being attacked by former employees who couldn't hack it in a competitive environment. His voice was smooth, confident, condescending. Ms. Park talks about patterns. Let me tell you about a different pattern. 10 people who were terminated for legitimate business reasons. 10 people who got together, found a lawyer, and decided to blame their failures on someone else. 10 people who turned down millions of dollars in settlement money because they're holding out for more. Thornton gestured dismissively toward the plaintiffs. You're going to hear a lot of accusations, but accusations aren't evidence. When you actually examine the facts, not the spin, not the narrative, but the actual facts, you'll see that these terminations were justified. You'll see performance issues. You'll see documented problems. You'll see a CEO making tough but necessary business decisions. He leaned against the jury box, adopting a conversational tone. Here's what really happened. These people sent inappropriate messages to themselves, or they misinterpreted innocent communications, or they're flat out lying because they see an opportunity to get rich by destroying a successful woman's reputation, and they're counting on you to believe their story without questioning it. Thornton straightened. But I know you're smarter than that. I know you'll look at the evidence objectively, and when you do, you'll see this case for what it really is, a shakedown, pure and simple. Thank you. He sat down. Judge Morrison looked at Rachel. Call your first witness. The plaintiffs call Ethan Cole. Ethan's legs felt unsteady as he walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore him in, and he sat down, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom focused on him. Rachel approached with a gentle smile. Good morning, Mr. Cole. Can you tell the jury a little about yourself? Ethan took a breath. I'm a single father. I have an 8-year-old daughter named Maya. I worked at Apex Innovations for 2 years in operations management before I was terminated. Can you describe what your job entailed? I managed vendor relationships, optimized supply chains, handled contract negotiations. It was challenging work, but I was good at it. How do you know you were good at it? My performance reviews were consistently high. I received 2 raises in 2 years. My manager told me I was on track for a promotion. Rachel pulled out a document. Is this your last performance review from Apex? Yes. Can you read the overall rating for the jury? Exceeds expectations in all categories. When was this review completed? 3 weeks before I was fired. Rachel let that sink in before continuing. Mr. Cole, on the night of March 8th, did you receive a text message from Victoria Hale? Yes. What time? 11:47 p.m. What did the message say? Ethan recited it from memory. See what you could have had. Was there anything attached to that message? Yes, a photograph. Can you describe the photograph? Ethan did, keeping his voice steady, his description clinical. He watched several jurors' expressions change from neutral to uncomfortable. How did you respond to this message? I told her it was inappropriate and that I wasn't interested. I asked her not to contact me like that again. Did she respond? No, there was no reply. What happened the next morning? I was called into a meeting with Ms. Hale and the head of HR. They told me I was fired. Did they give you a reason? They said my position was being eliminated due to restructuring. Did you believe that? Thornton stood. Objection. Calls for speculation. Sustained. Rachel adjusted. Based on your performance review 3 weeks earlier and your manager's statements about your trajectory, were you expecting to be terminated? No, not at all. What did you do after being fired? I tried to find another job, but every interview ended badly once they called Apex for a reference. Did you eventually connect with the other plaintiffs? Yes, through David Brennan, who'd had an almost identical experience. Rachel walked him through the rest of the timeline, establishing the pattern, building the narrative piece by piece. Then she yielded him to cross-examination. Thornton approached like a shark circling prey. Mr. Cole, you said you were a good employee, but isn't it true you had conflicts with your manager? No, that's not true. Never disagreed about anything? We had normal work discussions, but nothing I'd call conflicts. You claim Ms. Hale sent you an inappropriate message, but isn't it possible you misinterpreted something innocent? There's no innocent interpretation of that photograph. Or maybe you sent it to yourself to create evidence for this lawsuit. Ethan felt anger flare. That's ridiculous. Is it? You're asking for millions of dollars in damages. That's quite a payday for someone who can't find work. I can't find work because your client destroyed my reputation. Or because you're not as good at your job as you claim. Rachel stood. Objection. Argumentative and badgering the witness. Sustained. Mr. Thornton, ask questions. Don't make speeches. Thornton smiled thinly. No further questions. The trial continued for 2 weeks. Each plaintiff testified, telling their story, facing brutal cross-examination designed to shred their credibility. Jennifer Kwan broke down crying on the stand when Thornton suggested she'd invented her claims for attention. David Brennan barely controlled his anger when questioned about his financial desperation, but they all held their ground. Rachel called expert witnesses who testified about patterns in employment data, about the statistical impossibility of 10 terminations all being coincidental, about corporate culture and power dynamics. The defense called HR representatives who testified that all decisions were made according to policy. They called managers who claimed the plaintiffs had performance issues that weren't documented, but were known within the team. They called a psychiatrist who suggested that people in financial distress sometimes develop false memories. It was exhausting, brutal, and deeply personal. But the evidence kept mounting. The text messages, the phone records, the termination timeline, Jennifer Marks's recordings, the emails showing attempted cover-ups. And then, on day 9 of the trial, Rachel called Victoria Hale to the stand. The courtroom went silent as Victoria walked to the witness stand. She was sworn in, settled into her seat, and looked at Rachel with an expression of bored contempt. Ms. Hale, you've heard the testimony of 10 former employees claiming you sent them inappropriate messages and then fired them for rejecting your advances. Is their testimony truthful? No? So they're all lying? They're either lying or confused. 10 people, all confused in exactly the same way? Apparently, Rachel pulled out a phone log. These are your personal phone records, subpoenaed by court order. They show text messages sent to all 10 plaintiffs late at night. Do you deny sending those messages? I may have sent work-related communications. At midnight? At 1 a.m.? At 2:30 in the morning? The tech industry keeps irregular hours. Ms. Hale, we have the actual content of those messages. They're not work-related. They're sexual in nature. Are you claiming these records have been fabricated? Victoria's jaw tightened. I'm saying I don't recall the specific context. You don't recall sending explicit photographs to subordinate employees? I don't recall doing anything inappropriate. Rachel played Jennifer Marks's recording. Victoria's voice filled the courtroom, cold and commanding, instructing HR to make sure they're gone by end of week. Is that your voice, Ms. Hale? Yes. Were you instructing your HR director to fire employees who'd rejected your advances? No. I was instructing her to terminate underperforming employees. All 10 of whom happened to have rejected personal communications from you within the previous week? Correlation doesn't equal causation. But it certainly suggests a pattern, doesn't it? Thornton objected. Rachel withdrew the question. The cross-examination continued for 6 hours across 2 days. Victoria never broke, never admitted wrongdoing, never showed remorse. She deflected, denied, and dismissed every accusation with the same cold certainty. And in doing so, she made the jury hate her. Ethan could see it in their faces, the way they looked at Victoria with growing disgust, the way they leaned forward when Rachel presented damning evidence, the way they took notes when witnesses testified about retaliation. On the 13th day of trial, both sides rested. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following morning. That night, Ethan sat in his apartment with Maya, helping her with homework while his mind raced through everything that had happened. Tomorrow, Rachel would give her closing argument. Then Thornton would give his. Then 12 strangers would decide whether Victoria Hale had abused her power or whether 10 people had conspired to lie for money. Dad? Maya looked up from her math worksheet. You seem nervous. Big day tomorrow, sweetheart. Is it over after tomorrow? Almost. The jury will decide, and then, yeah, it'll be over. And then things will go back to normal? Ethan pulled her into a hug. I don't know if they'll go back to how they were, but we'll figure out our new normal together, okay? She nodded against his chest. The next morning, Rachel stood before the jury one final time. Members of the jury, you've heard 2 weeks of testimony. You've seen the evidence. You've heard from the plaintiffs, from witnesses, from experts, and you've heard from Victoria Hale herself. She paused. The defense wants you to believe that 10 people conspired to lie, that they manufactured evidence, that they're all just greedy opportunists. But ask yourselves, does that make sense? These people turned down millions of dollars in settlement money. They've endured public scrutiny, character assassination, and financial ruin. Why would they do that if they were lying? Rachel walked along the jury box. The answer is simple. They're not lying. They're telling the truth about a powerful person who believed she could do whatever she wanted without consequences,
who believed that money and lawyers and intimidation would silence anyone who dared to speak up. She stopped, looking directly at the jury. You have the power to prove her wrong. You have the power to say that no one, no matter how wealthy, no matter how powerful, is above the law. The evidence is clear. The pattern is undeniable. Victoria Hale harassed these employees and retaliated against them when they refused her advances. Now it's time to hold her accountable. Rachel returned to her seat. Thornton gave his closing argument, painting the plaintiffs as opportunists and defending Victoria as a victim of a coordinated attack. He was eloquent, passionate, and utterly unconvincing after 2 weeks of damning evidence. Judge Morrison gave the jury their instructions and sent them to deliberate. And then there was nothing to do but wait. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Ethan spent those days in a state of suspended animation, unable to focus on anything, jumping every time his phone buzzed. David paced Rachel's office like a caged animal. Sarah stress-cleaned her apartment 3 times. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the call came. Jury's reached a verdict, Rachel said. Everyone get to the courthouse. Now. 20 minutes later, they were all back in the courtroom. The gallery was packed, the media section overflowing. Victoria sat at the defense table, her expression unreadable. The jury filed in. None of them looked at Victoria. That, Rachel had told them, was a good sign. Judge Morrison addressed the jury foreperson. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Please hand the verdict forms to the bailiff. The bailiff carried several sheets of paper to the judge, who reviewed them silently before handing them back. The defendant will rise. Victoria stood, Thornton beside her. On the question of whether the defendant, Victoria Hale, engaged in a pattern of sexual harassment against the plaintiffs, how do you find? We find in favor of the plaintiffs. Ethan felt his heart stop. On the question of whether the defendant retaliated against the plaintiffs for rejecting unwanted sexual advances, how do you find? We find in favor of the plaintiffs. Victoria's face went pale. On the question of damages, what amount does the jury award to each plaintiff for lost wages and emotional distress? $850,000 per plaintiff. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. On the question of punitive damages, what amount does the jury award? $20 million to be split equally among all plaintiffs. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! I will have order! But Ethan barely heard it. He was staring at the jury, at these 12 people who'd believed them, who'd seen through Victoria's lies and power and money to the truth underneath. They'd won. Actually won. Victoria remained standing, her face a mask of shock and fury. Thornton was already whispering urgently in her ear, probably discussing appeals. But right now, in this moment, justice had been served. Judge Morrison addressed Victoria directly. Ms. Hale, the jury has found against you on all counts. In addition to the monetary damages, I'm ordering injunctive relief requiring Apex Innovations to implement comprehensive anti-harassment policies and independent oversight. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the appropriate authorities for potential criminal investigation. Victoria's lawyer immediately stood. Your Honor, we intend to file an appeal. You're certainly entitled to do that, Counselor. But for now, this verdict stands. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down one final time. Ethan turned to find David grabbing him in a fierce hug, both of them laughing and crying simultaneously. Jennifer was sobbing with relief. Sarah was shaking her head in disbelief. Marcus was pumping his fist in the air. Rachel simply smiled, quietly satisfied. Outside the courthouse, they were mobbed by reporters. This time, Rachel gave them permission to speak. Ethan stepped up to the microphones, David beside him. We didn't do this for money, Ethan said, his voice steady. We did this because someone needed to stand up and say that this kind of behavior is wrong, that powerful people don't get to abuse their employees without consequences. We did this so the next person who receives a message like we did knows they don't have to stay silent. A reporter shouted, "What do you want to say to Victoria Hale?" Ethan thought for a moment. I hope she learned something from this. I hope she understands that integrity isn't weakness, and that people who stand up for themselves aren't enemies. But mostly, I hope she never gets the chance to do this to anyone else again. The news cycle exploded. The verdict was the lead story on every major outlet. Social media erupted with discussions about corporate power, sexual harassment, and accountability.
2 days after the verdict, the Apex Innovations Board of Directors held an emergency meeting. The results were announced in a terse press release. Victoria Hale had been removed as CEO, effective immediately. An independent investigation would be conducted into the company's workplace culture. Reforms would be implemented. Victoria herself disappeared from public view, her lawyers filing appeals that everyone knew were doomed to fail. The money from the judgment began to arrive in installments. Ethan's share, after legal fees, was substantial enough to change his life completely. But more important than the money was what happened 3 weeks after the verdict. Ethan received a job offer from a mid-sized tech company he'd interviewed with months earlier. The hiring manager had followed the trial and had been impressed by Ethan's courage. "We need people with integrity," the manager said. "People who'll do the right thing even when it costs them. That's who you are. That's who we want on our team." The salary was better than what he'd made at Apex. The hours were reasonable. The culture was healthy. Ethan accepted immediately. 6 months after the trial ended, Ethan and Maya moved into a new apartment in a better neighborhood. It had 2 bedrooms, a small balcony, and was close enough to Maya's school that she could walk there on nice days. On moving day, as Ethan unpacked boxes in his daughter's new room, Maya held up the stuffed rabbit that had been with her through everything. "Mr. Hops likes it here," she announced. "Yeah, how can you tell?" "He says it feels like home." Ethan smiled. "I think he's right." That evening, after Maya was asleep in her new room, Ethan sat on the balcony and looked out at the city lights. His phone buzzed with a text from David. "Coffee shop on 7th, tomorrow at noon. There's someone you should meet." The next day, Ethan walked into the familiar coffee shop where this had all begun. David was there, along with a young woman Ethan didn't recognize. "Ethan, this is Amanda Chen. She worked at Apex until last week." Amanda looked nervous but determined. "I received a message last month from the new CEO. It was similar to what you described in the trial." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "The new CEO is doing the same thing?" "Not exactly the same, more subtle. But the pattern is there." Amanda pulled out her phone. "I recorded a conversation with HR about it. They told me to keep quiet or I'd be terminated for creating a hostile work environment." She looked between Ethan and David. "I need help, and I heard you two are the people who know how to fight back." Ethan glanced at David, who nodded slightly. Then he looked back at Amanda and said the only thing he could say, "Tell us everything." Because that was the real victory, Ethan realized. Not the money, not the verdict, not even Victoria's downfall. The real victory was proving that standing up to power was possible, that silence could be broken, that accountability could be demanded, and that when people chose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, integrity over survival, they changed the world, one brave decision at a time. Later that night, after meeting with Amanda and connecting her with Rachel, Ethan returned home to find Maya coloring at the kitchen table. "How was your day?" she asked without looking up. "Interesting," Ethan said, settling into a chair beside her. "I helped someone who needed it." "Like the people you helped before?" "Yeah, like that." Maya selected a purple crayon and carefully colored in what appeared to be a robot's arm. "You know what I learned at school today?" she said. "What's that?" "Miss Rodriguez told us about people who fight for what's right even when it's hard. She called them heroes." She looked up at him with those serious 8-year-old eyes. "I told her my dad is like that." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "What did she say?" "She said I'm lucky." He reached across and tapped her drawing. "I think I'm the lucky one, sweetheart." Maya went back to her coloring, satisfied with this answer. And Ethan sat there in his modest apartment, watching his daughter create her imaginary worlds, thinking about the long road that had brought them here, the midnight message that had started everything, the choice he'd made to respond with truth instead of silence, the months of struggle and uncertainty and fear. All of it had led to this moment, a quiet Tuesday evening, a daughter who felt safe, a job that respected him, a community of people who'd learned they didn't have to accept abuse as the price of survival. That photograph Victoria had sent with the message, "See what you could have had," was meant to show him what he was missing by choosing integrity. But she'd gotten it backward. What Ethan had now, peace, self-respect, his daughter's admiration, the knowledge that he'd stood up when it mattered, was something money could never buy, and power could never grant. Victoria Hale, with all her wealth and influence, had never understood that. And that was why she'd lost. Not because the jury ruled against her, though they had. Not because she'd been removed from power, though she had. She'd lost because she'd built her entire empire on the belief that fear was stronger than courage, that silence was safer than truth, and that people would always choose survival over principles. Ethan Cole, a single father with nothing to spare except his dignity, had proven her wrong. And in doing so, he'd won something far more valuable than any settlement or verdict. He'd won himself back. "Dad?" Maya interrupted his thoughts. "Can you help me with this part? I can't get the color right." "Sure, sweetheart. What are you trying to make?" She pointed at her drawing, a purple robot standing in front of what looked like a building. "It's you," she explained, "standing in front of the bad place. But you're bigger than it is because you're brave." Ethan looked at the drawing, at this 8-year-old's interpretation of everything he'd been through, and felt something shift in his chest. All the fear, all the doubt, all the moments when he'd wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake, it all fell away. Because his daughter understood. Not the legal complexity or the corporate machinations or the financial stakes. She understood the only thing that really mattered. Her father had faced something scary, and he hadn't backed down. "I think the color is perfect just the way it is," Ethan said softly. Maya beamed at him and went back to her creation. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Somewhere out there, Amanda Chen was probably sitting in her own apartment, wondering if she'd made the right choice by coming forward. Somewhere, Victoria Hale was probably plotting her comeback, convinced that this was just a temporary setback. And somewhere, there were other people receiving messages they didn't ask for, facing choices they shouldn't have to make, wondering if speaking up was worth the cost. But now they had an answer. 10 people had stood up. 10 people had refused to be silent. 10 people had chosen the harder path. And they had won. Not perfectly. Not without cost. But they had won. And that victory, Ethan knew, would ripple outward in ways they couldn't yet measure. Every person who heard their story would know that fighting back was possible. Every victim of workplace harassment would know they didn't have to suffer in silence. Every powerful person who thought they were untouchable would have to think twice. That was the real legacy. Not the verdict or the money or the headlines. The legacy was hope. Hope that integrity still mattered. That courage could triumph over fear. That ordinary people could hold extraordinary power accountable. Ethan looked at his daughter, safe and happy in their modest home, and felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The midnight message had been meant to destroy him. Instead, it had forged him into something stronger, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure that strength was used to protect others who found themselves facing the same impossible choice he'd faced. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't a promotion or a settlement or even a jury verdict. Sometimes it's simply refusing to compromise who you are, even when the entire world is telling you to. Sometimes it's being the kind of person your child can be proud of. And sometimes that's everything.